Wow, good evening, everyone. My apologies for the technical glitch that we were dealing with behind the scenes. Technology is wonderful when it's working. When it's not, it's craziness. So I thank you very, very much for your patience. But we are here now, and welcome to Skeptical Inquirer Presents. As you know, this is a series of live online presentations from experts who are devoted to advancing science over pseudoscience, media literacy over conspiracy theories, and critical thinking over magical thinking. My name is Leanne Board, and I'm always delighted to be your host. I am a stand-up comedian, author, Center for Inquiry Fellow, and fellow Earth Dweller. As you get settled in, I'll share that today is National Nap Day. Yes, I had one, and I hope you did too. Today is also International Chess Day. Full disclosure, I've had a hard time learning how to play chess. It's just I don't understand why the pawns don't unionize and then rise up against the back rank.
It's very medieval.
Right? Viva la revolucion, my friends. But a couple of quick reminders. CFI's podcast, Point of Inquiry, is available wherever you get your podcast. And if you haven't already, you can round out your reading list with a subscription to Skeptical Inquirer magazine, which is really easy to get by going to skepticalinquirer.org. And it is not too early to start getting excited about SciCon 2023. It will be October 26th through 29th in Las Vegas, the epicenter of critical thinking. I'll be there, and I hope you can join us. If you're new here, please feel free to type your questions in the form of a question for our guest into the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. And now, as we get started, everyone, I will confess that I didn't think Paris existed until I went there. Good news, it does. The wine and croissants have made me a believer. Seriously, though, thanks to the internet, there's a thriving resurgence of long-debunked pseudoscientific ideas about our planet. Flat earthers, geocentrists, hollow earth, expanding earth, dowsing, crystal healing. I know it's a lot, but our guest tonight will dive into the booming online culture of earth-based pseudoscience and draw on his extensive background in geology and paleontology to put the nonsense claims to rest. Donald Prothero has taught college geology and paleontology for over 45 years, you guys, including at Caltech, Columbia, and Cal Poly Pomona. He earned his PhD in geological sciences from Columbia University. He is the author of over 48 books and over 380 scientific papers, mostly on the evolution of fossil mammals and on using Earth's magnetic field changes to date fossil-bearing strata. He has earned multiple awards, including the James Shea Award of the National Association of Geology Teachers for outstanding writing and editing in the geosciences, and the AIPG Award for outstanding achievement. He is a literal rock star. And while we didn't get to meet in person at DragonCon last year, it makes my nerd heart happy that he was one of the featured speakers on the SkepTrack panel. So please welcome to the Skeptical Inquirer Presents screen, finally, Dr. Donald Prothero. Sir,
Thank you very
you have the
much.
con. You are here.
Thanks
You are
for the
very welcome.
introduction. Yes. Sorry, we had technical difficulties. Apparently, my Mac is too modern for you guys. So we learned that problem the hard way. All right. So you have ready for me to take over here and make sure I'm sharing my PowerPoint. Oh, I should do this before I lose myself on the screen. The book I'll be talking about is this one, which came out a year and a half ago now, almost 2 years ago. And of course, with the shallow focus and zoom, you can't see it. Let's see if I get it close to my face. You can see. Anyway, the point of it is, if you ever have a copy of this, the book has the image on it, which looks like the Earth is round. And then if you undo the dust jacket, which of course doesn't work on a paperback, the image under it is a flat Earth. That doesn't work too well. Well, I'll show it to you in the slides. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen and my PowerPoint. I'll switch over to that now. All right, so we're good. Everyone sees my PowerPoint? Yes, Leanne, you can see it?
Yes, I can.
All right, we're good. I went to full screen now. It should show my opening slide. So this talk is about weird ideas about the planet. I've written books already about UFOs and aliens with co-authors, wrote about Bigfoot and other cryptids. And I thought, no one's ever written a book about how many strange ideas are out there, especially when it comes to things like flat Earth and so on. And so I thought I'd try that as a topic a couple of years ago, actually, now to put that all together into one place and point out what it says about us as well as what these people say themselves. So let's open with a little bit of cultural reference here. Um, Consider the following, as they say. If you've paid attention to media, especially pop media, you'll hear all the time these various people are mostly celebs who are famous for being famous, not necessarily accomplished, but just famous, like Tila Tequila and Sherry Shepherd and various athletes who are not necessarily known to be great in astronomy, saying, well, the Earth is flat, or they're not sure that the Earth is round. And they routinely say this, of course, naturally getting a tremendous amount of media attention, whether that's their goal or not. But it's sort of alarming that it even gets media attention, let alone that lots and lots of people listen to it, and let alone that anyone believes it. But it's shockingly true that a lot of people have accepted things like flat Earth thinking, which we'll talk about. Okay. Some people put their money where their mouth is. This is a famous story. A guy, mostly a stunt performer and builder of rockets and motorcycles and cars, a guy by the name of Mad Mike Hughes. And on February 23rd, 2020, he put his money where his mouth is and decided he was going to shoot himself up into the sky in a homemade rocket to get high enough to see the curvature of the Earth or to see that it was flat. And his homemade rocket launched off the floor of the Mojave Desert out by one of my favorite trilobite localities on February 23rd of 2020, just shortly before COVID all shut us down. And so some of you know the story. I won't have time to play the YouTube video, but it's like a 30-second clip. The flight was very short. He launched about 200 or 300 feet in the air and then turned around and crashed and died. So he really died for his beliefs, although not really in a very spectacular way. And then there's other examples of the culture. The rapper by the name of B.O.B., who has gotten into a Twitter battle with Neil deGrasse Tyson, who, after all, is one of the public faces of science in this culture. So he does deal with these people occasionally. And Neil deGrasse Tyson actually got his, I guess it was his son or his nephew, to write a rap in reply to B.O.B. Okay, so many of these people are celebrities, not necessarily experts, just celebrities. They're famous not for education or intelligence, just famous for being famous, like Sherry Shepherd and Tila Tequila and various athletes like Wilson Chandler, Denver Nuggets, Kyrie Irving, who keeps changing teams, so now my slide's out of date. Shaquille O'Neal has gone on record saying he's not sure the Earth is round, but then Shaquille O'Neal is famous for punking lots of people. Stephon Diggs, last I know, I think he was still with the Buffalo Bills, and rappers, okay? Plus Mad Mike Hughes. So this gets in the media a lot now, and it's a lot of people apparently getting this kind of attention. Why is this happening? Okay, well, of course, part of it, of course, is the first word we just said there, media, right? If it bleeds, it leads, right? To get people to pay attention in the old days, of course, to newspapers, now it is to websites, you need sensationalism, outrageous ideas, shocking, spectacular stuff that gets people's attention. So you get a flat earther in there, people will stop and look at it. They may not read it all the way through, but they'll pay attention. And that's what it's all about in media these days, okay? That's the main thing, I think, is media feeds on this, and media drives it in many ways. People know they get exposure if they say something outrageous, and the media jumps on it. There's also an undercurrent, which we've seen very strongly in our political sphere lately, of defiance of experts, especially in the conspiracy thinking mode. And I'll show you in a moment, conspiracy thinking is very strongly embraced by these people because they have to believe everything is a conspiracy in order to accept this. And something else that would not have been true until only about 15, 20 years ago. It's now so easy for one crackpot idea to spread all over the world in minutes or even less than minutes, okay, without any kind of fact checking, quality control. You can broadcast an idea thanks to the internet in no time flat, and you get a tremendous number of people to see it in no time flat. I remember even back in the old dark ages of the 90s, to get a crackpot idea like flat earthism, any attention, to get any media attention, and other than being mocked in the newspapers, there was one show famously on at late night, like midnight, called Coast to Coast with Art Bell, who frequently had guests on who would talk about UFOs and that kind of stuff. And once in a while, he'd have a flat earther. And that was the most media exposure these people ever got. And of course, they would send out papers and send out newsletters and occasionally get a book, which didn't score through a mainstream publisher. That was it. It was very hard to get anyone to pay attention to the crackpot. But now, anything you want to put out there, you put on a website, and if you can get someone to start linking to it and then other people following him, all of a sudden you can get everyone to go right down the rabbit hole. And what I call the internet is really the cesspool of lies. 90% of what's on the internet is not true, yet people believe it anyway, okay? And of course, part of this is because we don't teach critical thinking, and people are not exposed to critical thinking. And they're, especially in school, when it comes to science, they don't learn how scientists think. They just memorize the facts of science. They don't understand the evidence supports it. One of the things I take a pride doing when I teach at college level is I try not to teach just a bunch of facts that are disconnected and can be spit and memorized for a test and forgotten. But I ask my students to understand the evidence that supports a particular scientific idea, and that's something I'll get back to. And of course, again, back to our idea of defiance of experts, the idea if you're thinking what you want to think, you're an amateur, you can figure everything yourself. You don't need education. The so-called democratization of knowledge, and of course, comes with the defiance of experts and elites. Okay. However, in the case of many of the things we're going to talk about today, one of the problems with that kind of thinking is that the kinds of things like the evidence for the flat Earth, the evidence for the round Earth, I should say, or the evidence that the Earth travels around the sun rather than the sun travels around us, those are not common sense, right? They're not common part of human thinking from the ancients, right? It looks to common sense. Our intuition says we're the center of the universe. The sun moves around us. Our intuition says the horizon looks flat. The Earth is flat. These are things that are intuitive, common sense, but of course, thanks to science and thanks to the last 500 years, especially of astronomy, most of this stuff has now turned out not to be true. And this is counterintuitive. Not easy for people to accept that the Earth is round or that we're moving around the sun, because it doesn't look that way unless you're taught at a young age, which most of us are, that in fact is the way it is. So that's a problem. It's counterintuitive to accept the scientific truth. A lot of people say, well, science is just applied common sense. Well, in some cases, science is not common sense. It's not intuitive. It actually doesn't make sense unless you learn it. Okay, so there's the actual cover of the book with the dust cover on, making it appear like the book cover shows a round Earth. And then you take the dust cover off and it's actually a flat Earth with the water spilling off the end. But again, I didn't manage to make that demonstration work too well. Okay, there are like 20 different cases, examples in my 20 or some chapters in this book of different kinds of weird ideas about the Earth, from everything from healing stones to people using dowsing sticks. There's a whole slew of these things. I'm not going to have time to talk about most of them. I'm just going to focus on a few of the most important ones and give more of an in-depth coverage of it. And we'll start with the one that, as we just mentioned at the beginning, has got the biggest publicity, the flat Earth idea, okay? And again, back to our initial point that the Earth does appear flat, and the distances we're used to seeing, and distances we can see when we're at the ground level, it appears the Earth does look flat, okay? And so that is the intuitive, and that is what we're trying to fight against here, because intuitive turns out not to be true in this case. So if you're going to believe the Earth is not round but flat, then every image of Earth that we see, including the one behind me on my screen and on my t-shirt, must be hoaxes. NASA is part of a global conspiracy to fool us, to believe the Earth is round, along with everybody else. Astronomy and everything else has all been out there in one giant hoax, and that's where you have to really go down the rabbit hole of conspiracy thinking. And so then instead of that, they think the Earth is a giant flat disk with the sun and moon moving around us in loops above us. And to do that, of course, you have to think of the Earth as having a flat surface. Then Antarctica can't exist, right? It's a giant ice wall surrounds this flat disk. I'll show you pictures of how they think about that in a moment. And of course, to make this work, basically you have to give up the idea of gravity. You have to give up a lot of different kinds of things in physics and mathematics in order to make any of this work at all. So this is the kind of conspiracy thing we're thinking here in this little meme off the internet, but it's basically the same theme, right? If the globe is a lie, so is the moon landing, so is space, so is NASA is faking it, so is the ISIS, astronauts are actors, satellites are fake, SpaceX is fake, gravity's a lie, Big Bang's a hoax, dinosaurs are a hoax. It all goes together, okay? So this is a projection, sort of an image of way they think about the flat Earth, right? It goes back to the Middle Ages, basically, or older. A flat disk with a dome of stars above us in the sky, which is something that was around in the Middle Ages and before it. And the sun and moon are in separate little sort of circular paths that travel around this thing. And to explain the seasons, they supposedly rise and fall in a spiral from lower on the horizon to higher on the horizon. That is their entire model right there. Now, the problem with that, of course, is if the sun is really above us and just circling in a big loop rather than we are traveling around it, the sun will always be casting light on the surface of the earth. In a flat earth, right, there'd be no way in which there could be night, right? There's no side of the earth that's not illuminated. And they've given various explanations for why this works in their model, but it usually doesn't work very well. The only way you would have night at all is if there's times in which the earth is not facing the sun, and that's the only way to make it happen, okay? And then, of course, this other thing, they look at a polar projection like this, which we all know is just a map convention. It's not a true rendering of a spherical Earth. It's just a map convention, but this polar projection to them is a reality. Right? The North Pole exists, all the continents are wrapped around it, and there is no Antarctica. There is no South Pole. It's just an ice wall out there. And there was planned to be actually some giant party cruise to go right up the edge of the Antarctic so-called ice wall and to see if they could hike over it and see that the Antarctica was the edge of the Earth. Apparently it happened, planning was supposed to happen in 2020, and COVID, of course, changed that anyway. But either way, it'd be surprising if they try to do much. And of course, the whole idea would be that everybody who's ever been to Antarctica and the South Pole was, of course, a hoaxer and a liar. And I have many friends who've been to South Antarctica for research. So fundamentally, what they're doing is something like this. It's basically a toy, right? They make a little model, physical model, that's a toy like this. And this is one of the more famous of these flat earthers, by the way. He was in a documentary on the subject. And here he's got the two lights on a sort of rotating stem, which makes the sun and the moon go around. That is their entire physical model, okay? And basically, that is all it is. It's a physical model. They cannot do this mathematically. They cannot do the math or physics, and in most cases, because they can't do math or physics. They're often very phobic about math or physics in this case. They don't trust math or physics. They trust simple physical objects like this when they're talking about this stuff, okay? Now, there's a really cool documentary out there called Behind the Curve, and I won't have time to say much about it. That's Bob Knodel, by the way, who's a flat earther I just showed in the previous slide. He was one of the main stars of it. And in one segment of this thing, okay, they set up a bunch of posts on a straight line across a flat area, like a lake, I believe. And they have them all set up so they're supposedly at the same height with a hole between them. And they're going to show that if they flash a light through the holes, that they would all end up, the light pass through with a straight line of holes and they would not curve. When they actually set this up, it turns out the light doesn't go through until they move some of the holes up and down. And then they realize they just proved the earth was round. So it's a very funny video to watch because the flat earthers say everything they think and they end up sounding really foolish. And then they end up, of course, trying to demonstrate that they're right and demonstrate they're wrong. Okay, so I won't mock them any further at this moment. Let's just focus on the science, okay? As I said, when I teach at the college level, something like this, not this topic, but something simpler, what I always tell my students as a college level, maybe in high school, maybe in junior high, you were just told to memorize stuff and then spit it out on a test. But at college level, I really want my students to understand a little bit of why science says things like this. And I can't do that with everything we do in a class, but I do as often as I can. We have to understand how and why we understand certain things about the Earth and about the solar system and so on. So what is the evidence? And I won't run through this list. Let's just show you the examples of these. The first person to actually show this was not recent. It was a Greek mathematician lived in what was then Hellenistic Alexandria around 200 BC, Eratosthenes. And he noticed that, for example, on the first day of spring, the light at Alexandria, where he was, right on the coast of the Mediterranean, the sun would come at a certain angle from a vertical object, which in this case was an obelisk that the Egyptians had. But he'd heard word that down in Syene, which was on the south side of the Nile, almost equatorial, but sitting right on the Tropic of Cancer, on the first day of spring in the Tropic of Cancer, the sun was directly overhead. Excuse me, the first day of summer, sun was directly overhead. And that was because, of course, the first day of summer, the first day of spring, it's right. They are right overhead at this spot, the Tropic of Cancer. And so a deep well in Syene, the sunlight would go all the way to the bottom on what usually was March 21st or 22nd. So he did that observation himself, and then he calculated this angle here. And from that, he calculated the curvature of the Earth and the diameter of the Earth. And his value that he got in 200 BC was off by less than 1% of what we now understand. Incredible for someone who's working with mathematics that didn't have numbers. He was mostly doing this with geometry. The major thing, of course, that's been known for a very long time, I think convinced most Europeans, even before Columbus's time, right? Columbus was not the only person to realize the Earth was round. Most people did at that time, contrary to what you may have been taught in school. The issue for Columbus, by the way, was not that he was afraid about sailing off the edge of the Earth. It was that he had an idea the Earth was too small, and he thought by traveling west across the ocean, what was then the Atlantic Ocean, he could reach China. Didn't know there was much bigger Earth than he thought it was, and there was a continent in the way. But everyone believed the Earth was round in Isabella and Ferdinand's court. Anyway, they knew this because as they watched ships go out in the distance, the ships got smaller and smaller, which is fine. That's the vanishing point effect. But they always disappeared with the bottom disappearing first, followed by the top of the vessel. And so you could see the top of the vessel in the case of these ships, the masts and the sails, a lot longer than you could see the bottom of the ship. Okay. And the only explanation that makes sense for this, of flat Earth, they would just get smaller and smaller uniformly. You'd see the bottom of the ship as long as you saw the top. But if it was round Earth, you would stop seeing the bottom first and the top would be the last to disappear. Right. And so this is the appearance, right? The boat would disappear with the bottom disappearing over the horizon first, followed by the top of it. Okay. Flat Earth, the boat would just get smaller and smaller proportionally, but you see the bottom as long as you could see the top. And that is not what, in fact, we see. Now, this is a GIF here. I don't know how it works in Zoom, but this is an actual image. Someone did a series of little shots here and animated them together, show the top of this big container ship gradually disappearing in the horizon. Or you can do it with other objects. For example, this is a famous image of the power line that crossed Lake Pontchartrain to the east of New Orleans. And the vanishing point, if the Earth is flat, these power lines should just go straight until they got to be so tiny that you can't see them. But you actually see from this photograph, they do start to curve, and the bottoms disappear first. Okay, or if you have something like this, a series of windmills over a long straight line or across the ocean, if you get far enough out, they get smaller and smaller and the bottom disappears first. Okay, so that's our second line of evidence. The third one is something also known to the ancients, and of course allowed them to think of the Earth as round, and that is every time we have a lunar eclipse, that is when the Earth casts a shadow on the moon from the sun on the back side, the edge of that shadow is always curved. It's never anything else. There's a lot of images of this, but here's a fairly decent one from 2011 lunar eclipse in Hungary. And as you see, the curvature of the shadow as it goes across the bottom here of the moon, you see just slight curvature, but it's distinctive. And if you watch one of these things in real time yourself, which happens fairly often, you can see this even better. It's never straight, right? If the Earth was just a flat disk, there'd be times in which it would catch a shadow that was a straight edge. But it's always round, which only works if the Earth is a sphere or the moon is a sphere, right? So here is a flat Earth eclipse. You just have a bar of the flat edge of the Earth, but in fact, it's always curved. And then here's another simple point here. Every other object in the solar system and outside of the solar system for that matter, as people in the Flat Earthers Society will admit, if you look at Jupiter, if you look at Mars with a good telescope, you can actually see they're round, okay? So the Earth would be the only thing that isn't round. And so they say here in the caption, well, this is awkward. So what about seeing that curvature like Mad Mike Hughes is trying to do, blasting himself off the floor of the Mojave Desert for about 500 feet before he crashes? The problem with that is you can't see it until you're really, really high, 60, 70,000 feet, higher than most airliners fly. And most people can't do that, okay? If you're in an airplane at normal cruising altitude, 30, 40,000 feet, especially if you only have a little tiny window on the side, you're not high enough up to see it. Although if you actually go to the pilot's cabin, which you no longer can do thanks to 9/11, you can actually see it from the pilot's cabin a little better. And if you were up in some of these planes, like the SST used to fly a lot higher, it's much more apparent, but it's mostly, technical craft that travels 60, 70,000 feet that can see the curvature really well. So that is where you can actually see it, which means you won't normally get it in a civilian aircraft. But there are ways of going about this. If you Google a link that talks about a British astronomy society that set up a balloon with a live camera that kept broadcasting the whole time, they literally did a little experiment and then posted the video on the internet where you can watch this as it rises above the horizon until it gets to about 40, 50, 60,000 feet. And then they actually have this view that I show on my slide where you can actually see the curvature. And so they actually did this and posted the video. So anyone who doesn't think that's hoax would be able to see it for themselves. All right. And so this is another shot of a high altitude weather balloon looking at the edge of the Earth. And there's the curvature. It's not very strong at this elevation, but it's still there. And then, of course, lots of memes have been created about this. So if the Earth was flat, cats would have pushed everything off it by now. 40 people lost in the Flat Earth Surfing Championship as they surfed off the edge of the Earth. The only thing the flat earthers have to fear is sphere itself, right? This lends itself to lots of clever little memes in the Facebook crowd. And of course, the irony is that is the kind of world that they believed in up until about, 1500 or so, when people like Columbus and others reaccepted the ideas the ancient Greeks had already known. Now, together with this idea of flat Earth was the idea that the Earth is the center of everything. So here we have the Earth as a sphere, but it's the old astronomical notion that we're the center of everything, because yes, if you stand out at night and watch the stars and watch the planets, they, to our perspective, appear to be moving around us. That's the intuitive, that's the observational, that's the common sense, and it's wrong, okay? And so up until 1543, when Copernicus's book was published, this was the basic idea they knew, going back to many people, but it's Ptolemy, the famous Alexandrian astronomer, is the most famous example of this. So this is the old notion, again, usually attributed to Ptolemy, but it was pretty much found in all ancient cultures. Earth is the center. The various planets are moving around us, like Venus, for example, and Jupiter. The sun is out there somewhere between Jupiter and Mars, and then what they could see back then of things like Saturn and so on. But we are at the center of everything, and they're moving in spheres around us. And so that's called geocentrism, right? Earth center. Today, of course, we understand the Earth is not the center, the sun is. So we have the heliocentric system. And of course, pretty much the heliocentrism was the first break in astronomy, thanks to Copernicus, that led us to modern astronomy. Nonetheless, there are people who reject 500 years since Copernicus and his discoveries. There's a group called GalileoWasWrong.com. They're mostly extreme fundamentalist Catholics who not only reject science, they also reject the Vatican. Even though they're technically Catholics, they have to pay attention. And of course, because literally the Bible in many places says or indicates that the sun revolves around the earth. The most famous of which is the passage where Joshua makes the sand stand still, right? It's moving and then he makes it stand still, okay? Again, because to ancients and to the intuitive view, it looks like the sun's doing the moving. It's the way we describe it, right? The sun is moving across the sky. We think of it that way. That's intuitive. It also turns out to be wrong. And of course, Copernicus is the first to make a break with this in 1543, published it as he was dying, so he could never be tortured for it by the Inquisition. But about 50 years to 100 years later, Galileo and Kepler started really pushing the idea harder. And by the early 1700s, Isaac Newton's work on astronomy and on gravitational attraction pretty much put together the modern solar system. Okay, in fact, the word solar system and the idea that there is a system of planets orbiting the sun is post Isaac Newton, when it was not accepted before that time. However, just like the flat earthers, the geocentrists know that publicity is good, no matter what kind of publicity is. They try all they can to get a lot of media attention and try to give their ideas some kind of hearing, because they know most of us are shocked and will mock them. So they can once in a while generate these big conferences where they pull all their people together and harangue everyone with their ideas. In 2014, they did a sort of pseudo documentary, basically one of those gotcha type of documentaries, sort of like what Ben Stein did with the evolution documentary he did a few years back, where they tricked a bunch of legitimate scientists and legitimate physicists, especially, not telling them the motive of their particular documentary, and got them to talk sort of in a relaxed fashion about this topic. And then, of course, they would edit it down to something that sounded incriminating. So a lot of these people who appeared in it did not say or did not intend to say what they actually saw on the screen. The documentary only aired a couple of times in a couple of theaters, lost lots of money, but that wasn't the point. The point was the publicity itself. The point was getting themselves heard, and that they had managed to do. So this is one of the mastheads from their website. Galileo wrong, the church was right. Well, of course, the church today doesn't have a problem with Galileo. In fact, they apologized to him only 500 years too late. This is one of their books here, Geocentrism 101, by a guy named Robertson Jennis, who's probably their main guy right now. I won't say much more about their ideas because it's pretty obvious what they're talking about. Let's now ask the question, how do we know that the Earth, in fact, is not the center of everything, that the sun is moving around the Earth, but that instead that the Earth is moving around the sun? Well, first of all, we can see this from satellites, especially the various probes that have left the Earth and turned around and looked at us from space. But of course, remember, that doesn't amount to them. They're also conspiracy theorists. They also think NASA's in the bag. They also think there's no way that that's possible. So you're not going to convince them by showing images from space of Earth orbiting the sun. Okay, so other things, of course, none of which they'll accept, but other things you can do to show that the Earth is rotating and show that the Earth is moving. And one of the most famous was about 200 years ago, what's called Foucault's pendulum, which I'll show you in a moment. And then the Coriolis effect, which I'll also show you in a second here. And then the Chandler wobble, the wobble of the Earth on its axis, which makes the stars change position. This would not be possible with the Earth at the center of the universe. Finally, of course, all the planets in the solar system are moving in the same direction, in the same plane, okay, which even they admit they're moving in the same direction, the same plane, just not around the sun, right? Geocentrism can't explain that. Right? It only makes sense with the modern models of how the solar system formed. Okay, so here he is with one image of many you can look up on the internet of satellites photograph both the moon and the Earth from the same frame, and also, you know, shots of the moon and the Earth and the sun in the background, and the sun is obviously not rotating around the Earth. The most easy way to demonstrate it, if you've ever been to some of these large science museums or planetariums, the one at Griffith Park here in California and Los Angeles is a good example. It's called Foucault's pendulum, developed in the 1820s and 30s by Jean-Jacques Foucault in France. And basically what he did is he set up a pendulum that swings back and forth, and he usually has some kind of motor at the top to keep it from running down due to inertia. And he has it set up so that if you set it up just right, every few minutes or every few tens of minutes, depending on how many of these you have, it knocks over another peg as it appears to go around and around in a circle over the course of 24 hours. And the only way that works, of course, is if the Earth is rotating. So it's the way to imagine this is, let's say we took a pendulum right over the North Pole and we allowed it to swing back and forth and back and forth. If you were to then look down on the North Pole, you would see that the Earth appears to rotate beneath it. Or to a person sitting the Earth, it appears the pendulum is turning. What's actually turning is the Earth below the pendulum. And it works on any other part of the Earth's surface, just easiest to demonstrate on the North Pole. Okay, and so that demonstration is one of the first of many that shows the Earth is rotating. This is something I teach all the time when I teach meteorology, when I teach oceanography, climate science, the so-called Coriolis effect, something that's very important to how fluids move across the Earth, especially air currents in the atmosphere and water currents in the ocean. And that is something, if you've ever tried this before in a merry-go-round, again, because some of the better science museums have this demonstration where you can try it for yourself. Let's say you're on a merry-go-round spinning around. Well, let's say it's not spinning first. Let's keep it still. And you're playing catch with a friend across the merry-go-round. You throw a ball to your partner and it goes straight to them if you threw it right, and they catch it and they throw it back. Now, there's a bunch of videos online, by the way, that you can play to watch this demonstration in real time, but I won't have time to play them here. But feel free to look them up if you want. Just ask for Coriolis, video link, look for Coriolis demonstration or whatever. If you spin yourself on a merry-go-round and throw the ball across it to your target, invariably, if you're spinning fast enough and you're far enough apart from your target, the ball will not go in a straight line to your perspective. It will actually deflect. So if your merry-go-round is spinning counterclockwise as viewed from above, the ball will appear to deflect to the right. If your merry-go-round is going clockwise as viewed from above, the ball will appear to veer to the left. And what's happening there is, in fact, as you throw the ball, your target is moving, right? You're not throwing at a stationary object anymore. You're putting a moving target. So from the perspective of you or from your target, the ball is curved. But in fact, what's happening is your target moves. The ball is moving a straight line, but the target's not there when it arrives, right? In other words, you can't throw to a person straight across you by throwing straight. Instead, you do what you do in basketball, right? If you're throwing to a teammate and the teammate's on the move, you don't throw to where they were when you release the ball. You throw to where you expect them to be, right? You anticipate their motion and try to throw to where they're going if you want the ball to reach them. So anyway, this deflection to the right on a counterclockwise spinning system, to the left on a clockwise spinning system, happens to all the ocean currents of the world and all the air currents of the world. As they travel across the Earth's surface, in the northern hemisphere, the Earth appears to be counterclockwise rotating. So everything in the northern hemisphere moves to the right. And this is the fundamental thing why air currents move the way they do, and ocean currents as well. If you're in the southern hemisphere, they go the opposite direction, to the left. Okay, so here we go. Here's Teach the Controversy with the Earth at the center. All right, so those are two of the more commonly cited and more famous examples of strange ideas about the Earth, most of which have gotten a fair amount of media attention. Here's one you may not have run into too often, but it's actually quite big on the internet. That's called the expanding Earth model. In the days before plate tectonics, in the 60s and in 50s mostly, there was a famous Australian geologist named S. Warren Carey, who was a big proponent of the idea that the Earth expanded. And he used things like, for example, the fit of South America against Africa across the Atlantic as evidence for that. And it was, of course, real. That fit does occur. But plate tectonics came along and gave us a better explanation. It's not Earth's expansion. It's, in fact, the continents themselves have moved. Okay, and so plate tectonics made the whole idea pretty much passe. Warren Carey died a bitter man. And then along comes the internet and stuff that's garbage that people can't tell is garbage. In this case, not a scientist, but a comic book artist and animator by the name of Neil Adams. You can just type in that search and expanding Earth, and you can watch his video for yourself. There's the link in my slide. He does a very clever job of making it look like you can fit all the continents tightly together on a smaller Earth. And then he animates the Earth expanding, and the continents all seem to move apart to the positions they have now. And that's convincing on the very crude scale that he does it with that animation. But if you actually work at it in detail, you can tell right away there's lots of problems. And of course, anyone who's taken a couple of geology classes is going to immediately tell you what's wrong with it, because it has a whole list of things that geologists know about the Earth that are simply violated by this idea. But of course, again, on the internet, this is a cesspool of lies. Most of what you read on the internet is not true, especially if you get into some of these rabbit holes of strange conspiracy thinking. And so it gets credibility, it gets attention in ways that were simply not possible 25 years ago. So this is actually images from his thing, with the Earth only being 4,000 years old and expanding so fast that you can go from continents all touching each other to having today. Okay. I won't say anything further about that. It's been geophysically shown there's no way that can happen. The Earth has never expanded in any significant sense once it reaches present size, which is around 4 billion years ago. So there's no point to debunk it any further. And here's an even weirder one. So-called idea the Earth is hollow inside. I mean, of course, this is from sci-fi, right? Jules Verne, Journey to the Center of the Earth. And at the time Jules Verne wrote that in the middle 1800s, the only thing people knew about the interior of the Earth was going down to deep caves and deep mines. That was their sense of what the interior of the Earth was. Of course, these things are not that deep. They're only a few meters, tens of meters below the surface of the Earth. And the Earth's diameter, of course, is over 12,000 kilometers. They're not even close to being very deep inside the Earth, but this is all they could know about in Jules Verne's day. And so if you watch movie versions of Journey to the Center of the Earth, they always have it traveling to layers lower and lower inside the Earth and running into dinosaurs and all sorts of stuff. It's great sci-fi. It's not science, okay? Geophysics has shown us, of course, the Earth is not like that at all, okay? The deepest we've ever reached into the Earth's interior directly is a borehole in Siberia that went down 12 kilometers, or about 7 miles. Okay. And then it could not be drilled any further because the pressures and temperatures are so unimaginably hot and so imaginably intense that the drill bits could not be continued, right? The Earth's gravity pulls everything down, so the pressure increases the deeper you go. And this has all been shown by geophysics, especially by running seismic waves through the Earth's interior and seeing how they travel. We can tell you that the density and the temperatures like anywhere inside the Earth's interior now, okay? But that stuff is science, and these people are not scientists, okay? The hollow earthers have come back, again, mostly on crackpot sites of the internet, after they were pretty much dismissed by the beginning of the 20th century. And once they get there, you run into all sorts of weird stuff. Like, there's these hidden tunnel sites and entrances to the Earth's interior and the polar regions, and that some people have gone into them. And the Nazis once explored them, and they put Adolf Hitler in one of them to preserve him so he can come back. I mean, this is where we get deep and deeper into the rabbit hole. All right. So again, this is 19th century sci-fi. It's fine for its time, but it's not science. Right? Because we have so much geophysical evidence of how these layers work because of the way we can look at seismic waves and how they travel through their interior. So that's all I have to say about that. I'm just going to briefly mention a few more of the things I cover in the book, but then I really want to talk about the thinking behind this. I cover about 20 different topics in the chapters of the book. I have a whole chapter on the moon landings were a hoax, which again is one of the really deep conspiracy thinkings, because there's a lot of people who worked on the space program and the moon landings, which, by the way, today is July 20th, the 54th anniversary of the moon landing in 1969, which most of us who are older than about 55 or 60 remember. And they were done live, and my dad worked part of his time at Lockheed for NASA. So if there were a conspiracy, he would have been in it, but he didn't. Okay. So that one's a whole topic itself. The best way to debunk it, if you want to do it, is go to some of the internet sites that debunk it. There's a very good episode of, gosh, I'm blanking on the name of the series here. Anyway, they've been debunked lots of ways. People have argued, and you've heard, especially during the millennium and the 2012 crazy shit, the magnetic field reverse and cause devastation. In fact, the magnetic field of the Earth, which I actually study, takes thousands of years to reverse, something like 5,000 years, which means all human history would have seen it by now. Okay. There's myths out there about earthquake weather. It's an urban legend, right? Earthquakes happen under any kind of weather because they happen deep into this crust where the temperature of the atmosphere change doesn't matter at all. I put in a chapter about the Noah's flood story and the creationist idea that the earth was actually flooded by Noah's flood, which is, by the way, debunked by devout Christian British geologists in the 1820s who were not in any way trying to prove evolution. Likewise, creationist claims the earth is only 6,000 years old. I put a chapter in that. I put a chapter together because Mount Shasta has a whole giant following of people who believe it's a otherworldly place, has base for aliens that came in. It's a nice volcano, but no aliens. I put in a whole chapter in Atlantis myth and where it comes from and why people keep coming back to it. And from dowsing and crystals, there's several other things I put in the book. All right, so let me finish this up now. I don't have time for any more of the actual details. Let's talk about the bigger thing we're going on here. It's a shocking thing to think that, in fact, it's very widespread, this kind of weird notions about the Earth. It's part of the reason I wrote the book. Lots of people don't really accept that the Earth is round. Something like only 2/3 of America accept that, to which 1/3 are doubtful or actually are flat earthers. That's pretty scary to think about. A very large number of people don't accepted science. Okay. So again, 66% of 18 to 24-year-olds, millennials, and younger now, Gen Z, are confident the Earth is round. Okay. But 95% of my older generation, 55 and older, are accepting it. And it declines as you get younger and younger. Who knows why? Maybe it's because the internet influences younger people more than it does older people in general. A survey said 84% of Americans think the world is round, 5% believes round are skeptics, 2% said the world is flat. Well, that's comforting. At least only 2% are confident but are having doubts. So still, 2% is not acceptable. The Google trend for flat Earth has been trending upward. A 99 Gallup poll said 18% of America said the sun revolves around the Earth. That's mostly scientific ignorance going on there. And of course, young Earth creationism not only denies evolution, denies general science, right? Denies the existence of the solar system and denies that the rocks of the Earth prove it's more than 6,000 years old and that Noah's flood does not occur in the rock record. This happens all the time. I mean, it's mostly focused in richer countries where they can spend a lot of time their time thinking about this and wasting their time, basically. So there are big conferences in the U.S. and Britain and a few other places like that where flat earthers get together every few years. But it's scary that there's that much interest and that much support. And so this was a whiteboard, apparently, from a flat Earth conference. Everyone was allowed to do a little poll here, how much they thought the Earth was flat or globe. I'm at least encouraged to find a few people clicked on globe before they started. Why is this occurring? As I mentioned in the very first slides, a lot of this has to do with this populist movement, which we've seen, of course, in our political sphere as well, which rejects anybody telling you anything, right? It rejects anyone with authority, expertise, resents being told what is happening, what is true. The word elite has now become a curse word, especially in American politics, especially with a certain political party which resents people with education. This has happened, unfortunately, captured a big chunk of the GOP. Conspiracy thinking has exploded, and of course, lately it's mostly exploded in the political sphere when QAnon and conspiracy nuts have really become a big chunk of the GOP's base at the moment. That it's not something that they are fringe anymore. This is now the entire Republican base has a big percentage of people who accept these crazy ideas. And of course, based on this primarily new factor, only 20 years we had it now, where the internet is where most people get their information. And they don't really get it that the internet can be full of bad information, that cesspool lies, as I said before. And of course, it is built, as of course the makers of Facebook and everybody else deliberately made it so, as some of you know, search engines are made to keep you clicking, keep you engaged. So once they figure out that you're clicking on crazy sites that talk about flat Earth, they suggest more links. And you can get yourself really quickly down a rabbit hole as you watch video after video after video, which are all basically linked together. Once the search engine knows what you're looking for, it'll try to hook you and keep you watching. That's how they make their money. They don't care that it's destroying the intelligence of its audience. Okay, and again, there is no fact checking. There's no quality control on the internet. Science works very differently. Science has peer review. Science is constantly self-policing. Bad ideas in science are weeded out sooner or later. But there's a ton of this stuff going on out there in the general public who are not scientists, okay? Plus, there's something we call the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is actually an old idea that's known all the way back to the Greek philosophers, where people who are not that well educated, who don't know as much as they should, think they're smarter than they really are. Okay, ignorant people are often the people who don't realize they don't know something. The more you're experienced and the more you're educated, the more often you recognize what you don't know and then recognize your own problems. And you're not as confident in your knowledge as if you're less educated. It goes to all these various thinkers. Only true wisdom is knowing you know nothing, from Socrates to Shakespeare. Fool thinks himself to be wise, but a wise man knows himself to be a fool. The Bible, a fool is wise in his own eyes. And then Robin Sharma, I thought I knew a lot until I learned a little. So here's a cute little cartoon of the whole idea, a childish thing where they basically think they know everything, and then they end up become insecure canyon somewhere in their teen years. And as they grow up, they go back through cycles of learning and then rejecting what they learned. But most people don't get stuck in childish thinking all their lives. So again, this is the Dunning-Kruger effect. It says, we said, goes back to the Bible and King Solomon and Socrates, but the Dunning-Kruger name isn't only that old. It's like the 90s. It's formally named in a scientific paper. And the basic plot here shows what people think their ability is, their perceived ability in green here. The bottom 25% percentile almost as high as the top. It's pretty much everybody thinks they're smart. But the actual ability, of course, is the way in which these people have actually been educated. And that shows a very different thing. So people who are not as smart and not as educated don't recognize their own incompetence. Great. So this is what happens when you get into the rabbit hole of the internet. You think you're doing research, as you see on the top thing. You're reading all these sketchy sites with garbage on them, like Conservapedia, InfoWars, naturalnews.com. And all you're doing is just being fed what the internet's trying to do is keep you going, keep you clicking, and feeding you false information by linking these sites one to another. And science doesn't work by searching the internet, okay? That's not research in the real sense. Science works by actually working directly with nature in some way. So here's our natural scientist here saying, that's cute. Or here's our pyramidal intellect, right? The way these people think. Your high school friend who calls and watches YouTube videos doing research and says sheep a lot is smarter than PhDs, who are smarter than those with masters, who are smarter than those with bachelors, who are smarter than high school and associate degrees, right? They think they're smarter than anyone because they saw it on the internet. Okay, and so hand in hand with this democratization of knowledge, basically by people learning false information from the internet, is this loss of trust, not just in elites, which is a political issue, but even science in general. The polls until fairly recently showed that some of the most trusted people in society were teachers, doctors, and scientists, okay? And that's, of course, been hurt. Thanks to the COVID skepticism, lots of people don't believe in modern medicine anymore, and doctors are not as high in rank. And likewise, scientists are under attack in a direct sense, especially climate scientists these days, and evolutionists as well, and I've experienced that. But in general, one political party in particular has become very distrustful of science because the powers that run them, especially the big powerful interests like the fossil fuel companies and all the rest, have caught them. So they distrust science, especially climate science and evolution. And that has spilled over into all aspects of their trust of science. Okay, that is scary. That scares me a lot, especially as a scientist who's trying to be an educator for the public. Okay, and again, it's mostly a partisan thing. I mean, I'm not saying the Democrats are completely free of this. We have science deniers in the Democratic Party too. We have Robert Kennedy Jr. as a horrible climate COVID denier and the vaccine denier, and there's people like that on both sides. But overall, the only party which is now actively fighting evolution, actively fighting climate change, for most of its recent history, actively fighting all the COVID measures that were put in place all the way to the top with the past president, is the Republican Party. It's very much a political thing. And part of the reason it's becoming very much more prevalent than it used to be, science denial especially, is because it's become a badge of membership. If you're a member of the GOP, at least in many of its circles, you have to believe these things, even if you don't really think those things. All right. And of course, that goes in hand with these polls now say the GOP thinks colleges are bad for you. That education is going to corrupt you rather than open your mind and make you think differently than you were raised in your family, which to some degree it does, but not because all professors are liberal. That's not true at all. It's because opening your mind to many things, which is something colleges should be trying to do, is may have you actually challenging some of the things you know or think you know. Now, I don't have a message here of how to solve this. I can make some suggestions, but I'm not really optimistic, I'm afraid to say, about where we're going here. But obviously, part of it is science education itself. We definitely need to do a better job of it. Things like doing demonstrations and showing people by experiment and showing people by various active activities makes a point clearer than just memorization of straight facts. And as much as possible, either by demonstration, by active learning, or just having students learn about evidence for something and then understanding that evidence, they will understand and get the general principle and keep it in their head a lot longer. And that's how I try to teach at college level. I know it's not such an easy task to do at middle school level or any K-12 level, okay? And in hand with that, not just teaching science better, but teaching critical thinking better. Getting students how to learn how to recognize how much the internet is a cesspool of lies, that there's tons of fake news out there, and usually not the news that the certain politicians call fake news. Especially when it comes to conspiracy thinking. It's now so widespread, especially in one political party, unfortunately, that you have to really sort of kill it at its head. Anyone who starts getting conspiracy thinking, you have to work hard to undo the damage that's created, okay? And there's ways of doing this, but I don't have time to talk about them here. But frankly, I'm very pessimistic at this moment. We've never had one political party which is overwhelmingly member of science denialism, which rejects science when it comes to vaccines and COVID and evolution and climate change. And now basically all of science is under attack as they attack colleges, universities, and higher education. And I'm just very, very pessimistic that we're going to be able to get out of this really soon. I mean, maybe it'll purge itself eventually, but we can't afford to be a society that's run by people who don't know science and people who don't accept science. Okay. We don't have the option of repealing reality. It's there whether you like it or not. A book I did in 2013 was called Reality Check, and it talked about all these various types of science denial, from creationism to climate denial to young Earth thinking, and a bunch of others as well. And the reason is very straightforward, right? We depend on science for the future, right? Most of us listening to this podcast would not be here today if it were not for science, right? And only a century ago, it was typical that a third of all babies that were born would die in childhood. Charles Darwin had 10 kids, 3 of which did not survive past the age of 10. And he had the best medical care available to him in the 1850s, okay? And in the underdeveloped world, it's still true. Child mortality rates are still pretty high, right? Nothing, that's no longer really a problem here in the westernized world. We take for granted that most kids that are born will survive. That has not been true for, only less than a century in this part of the world now, right? So you should thank science and medicine that you're alive right now, that you're even here to listen to this, along with all the other nice things that science and medicine does, like this computer that I'm broadcasting on, or my phone, or all the other things we are grateful for, right? We don't get the option of just rejecting science that doesn't fit our convenient beliefs. We have to accept science, what it tells us, whether it's what we want to hear or not. Okay. And Carl Sagan said this very well in a book published shortly before he died, actually. We've arranged a global civilization in which the most critical elements are profoundly dependent on science and technology. We've also arranged things that almost no one understands, science and technology. This is prescription or disaster. And now we're almost 30 years since that book came out. And it's not even close to what Carl thought. It's much worse. So this is something that we need to think about very hard. Okay, and so there we go for my little final dig here from The Onion. Scientists, Earth endangered by new strain of fact-resistant humans. All right, and so that'll end that. And let's see, I can close my PowerPoint and I'll come back to full screen here, will I not?
Yes,
all right.
You will.
Okay, so I guess I'm opening
humans.
for questions now. Is that the plan?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I've been listening attentively, and I will get to the questions. I do want to say though, I don't want to throw my girl Sherry Shepherd under the bus as a true flat earther.
Okay, I'll take that.
She's not. She actually apologized for that. She was having a brain freeze in her first week on The View.
Okay.
So she's not a ride or die flat earther at not
happens.
All.
Likewise, I think
yeah,
Shaq
it absolutely happens.
Too,
the lights are happening. The PAs are in your ear. We say unfortunate things. I'm sure my bloopers on this show have been legendary.
Well, unfortunately, thanks to the internet, her gaffe is
exactly
preserved forever. When you start searching her name, you'll get those links.
Yes, that's absolutely true. You said that. I really wish that all the stuff that's not true on the internet, we could tell if it had a different font.
Yeah,
like
it has its own system of blue check marks, right?
Well, not anymore. You got to pay for those now. When you were talking about the ice wall, I'm like, wasn't that in Game of Thrones? That's what separated.
I don't know. I never watched all the way through. So.
Oh well. Listen. Then I'll save you the heartache. Season 8 was a heartbreaker. And I agree with you. And of course, everyone on the show does. Big Bang Theory is not a hoax. It is a sitcom that ran for 12 seasons, and I've enjoyed them all. The inner core, when you showed that picture, it looked like Mordor. You sense that I have a sci-fi brain happening here.
Well, sci-fi draws some science all the time, and so does fantasy for that matter.
Yes, it absolutely does. And
you just have to remember to keep them apart.
Yes, which I do. I love being here. That's my balance. I do this, and then I go watch Star Trek, which releases
that's fine
tonight.
As long as you know the difference.
But I do. The trusting of scientists is important, and doctors. But listen, I also trust lawyers and car salesmen. I don't. I'm sorry.
That's one I'm a little less confident in.
Oh, absolutely. All right, so I want to get to some questions before we close out. And my favorite, Richard Hun, I'm not sure if I'm saying your last name correctly, when you showed the demonstration of the picture of the guy who's very meta, showing the flat Earth. What's on the underside of the disc? What do they think's underneath?
I have never heard them address that. It would be something worth me bringing attention. My guess is they won't tell you because they have no model for it. So.
Hmm. Gabriel asked, what's the alleged goal of the elaborate hoax conspiracy? What are they thinking? And first of all, we can't get that many humans to agree on all of this.
That's
But
right.
what's
That's right.
the end game here?
Well, that is usually the major flaw in conspiracy thinking, is that when you pin them down and ask them, well, why would everybody go to this much trouble to do this? Usually there's not a clear answer. Instead, they're all about manipulating us. They're all trying. In other words, it goes deeper and deeper and deeper until the conspiracy is everyone and everything is trying to fool you. And it makes no sense whatsoever. As most of us know, if you talk about the thinking of conspiracy thinking, the fast way to debunk it is to recognize every time there's been a major conspiracy, it's always been debunked, especially if it involves the more people it has in it, the more likely there's someone to spill the beans. Okay. You can hold a conspiracy of 2 or 3 people for a very long period of time because very few people are involved, but the more people involved, the more likely something leaks out. So conspiracies in this scale simply don't happen, right? They just no way to make this happen. And that's something that people never realize. Humans are terrible at keeping secrets. Humans are terrible at cooperating at this level of depth, no matter how much you swear them to secrecy and threaten them with prison or death, that they spill the beans. That does not happen in the real world at this scale.
Yeah, I
We
mean,
know this from
I think
Watergate.
we
We
all
know
learned
this
that.
from WikiLeaks. We know every time that there's been any kind of significant cabal of people making, conspiracies to do something big, the more people involved, especially, sooner it gets out. But it's never been held secret for very long. Unfortunately, those people
Yeah,
don't
I mean,
recognize that as important to think about. So,
you think they'd have learned that in high school? You can't
yeah,
keep a
well, I'm a
secret,
generation that remembers Watergate,
everybody.
so I know about how conspiracies fall apart fast.
This next question is almost kind of a part of this. It puts me in mind of the "What's the Harm" book and series. And Michael wants to know: is it really relevant to of hurtful to society if some people believe the Earth is flat?
Well, in the
What's the
sense
harm?
that,
What is the damage that
I'm
they do? And I know that's a gimme, but I
right. I mean,
some people might ask that.
whether you think it's flat or not is not going to affect your daily living much, unless there's some reason you have to engage it as part of your daily living. But if you're not working for NASA, that's not part of your life. What it's about, however, is that usually the idea that the Earth is flat is part of a general conspiracy thinking way, which means there's often the case that they accept other conspiracies, which means they may, for example, be a COVID denier and vaccine denier, in which case they're harming themselves and possibly harming others by not doing the medically safest thing to do. And we saw this horribly demonstrated in 2020 and 21 when a significant portion of American society, more than any other country for that matter, we refused to get vaccinated because they were all thinking conspiracies and refused. Still, vaccinations are still being denied by some significant chunk of the country. I wrote a whole chapter in my book about reality check and science denial, how damaging this is. It's gotten far worse, of course, thanks to the COVID deniers and the COVID conspiracy thinking. And so that's a place where it really rubber meets the road, is that you're endangering your own health, you're endangering other people's health if you engage in a broader thinking conspiracy, because in your whole viewpoint is giving you all sorts of bad information, which can affect your survival. And that's where I fear about it. Yes, flat earthism in itself is harmless, but it's usually tied to thinking about a whole bunch of other unscientific notions, many of which are not harmless.
Very good, sir. Very good. Let's see. Thomas has a question. What percentage of flat earthers, and I don't know if there's an answer for this, but what percentage of flat earth advocates are just trolling and don't actually believe that the earth is flat?
Yeah, that's hard to know. Okay. I mean,
Yeah,
we
I
talked about this
figured.
earlier. I think Shaq trolls people all the time because that's his nature.
Okay.
And when he says he's not sure the earth is round, I think he's punking reporters. And he's actually said several times after he did that, a few days later, he says, "Oh, I was pulling your leg." But I think there's other celebrities, if they don't really believe it, they're certainly putting their careers on the line and their reputation on the line by spewing it. And the true flat earthers may only be 1 or 2% of the population, but they have a disproportionately large influence. So the question is, are these people really sincere? I think a lot of them are. If you can get sincere about QAnon, then flat earthism isn't strange, right? QAnon's far weirder than flat earth thinking, right? If you think about all the crazy stuff that QAnon talks about, and that is requiring a level of disbelief of the reality that just beggars the imagination, then yes, people can really believe this shit. Okay. Sorry.
No, quite all right. Quite all right. This is Skeptical Inquirer presents After Dark, so we're fine.
Okay, we have a dull audience. Thank you. I tried to not use too many expletives. I teach adults, so I usually can use them. So,
of course. Now this might be a simple one in terms of refuting flat earthers, and Gabriel, thank you for this. He's asked, do flat earthers believe in GPS navigation or insist on using flat maps?
I don't think they really rely on GPS at all, although they may not realize what they're doing, when they take their phones out and use it to navigate on Waze. Who knows? I mean, the whole thing works without them understanding it. So as long as it works, they probably don't realize it. It assumes that the Earth is round and the satellites are actually rotating around us. If they don't get that, then they won't recognize that GPS is based on a round Earth. So,
wow. I mean, honestly, I really thought the Earth revolved around me, but clearly I am wrong. And I want to end on a question, a question from Michael once again. And he wants to know, what is the title of Professor Prothero's book on this topic?
All right,
and
let me
here
pull
we
it
are.
out again here.
Yes,
My
right
copy
here. We both have it.
Weird Earth, debunking strange ideas about the planet. And I believe now that it's been out a few years, you can get it fairly cheaply on Amazon in paperback if you don't want to spend a lot of money on it, or download it on whatever reader you use. But if you want the cool device that the book designers did with the dust jacket, you have to have a hard copy, hopefully one with a good dust jacket. As I said, the dust jacket is clever, and then it has a hole cut in the front. But I've seen a lot of copies of this. When it sits on a shelf or sits on a stack of books in a bookstore, the hole gets caught on things and it tends to rip the dust jacket.
But if you can get the hardcover, you guys, it actually is pretty cool. It is a wonderful conversation piece, and beautiful as well. Sir, thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
And bearing with us for our technical difficulties and working with us through it. I also want to thank the audience for your patience and letting us fix that so that we could bring this to you. Also, if you have missed any of this presentation, it has been recorded and will be available tomorrow for you to catch up, rewatch, and share at skepticalinquirer.org. As always, my thanks to Skeptical Inquirer, the Center for Inquiry, tonight's producer. I cannot give him enough thanks and praise. Michael, you were in the clutch. You really helped us out tonight. Thank you for helping us, fix everything. I could not have done this without you. So thank you for that. And of course, my biggest thanks to all of you in the audience for sharing your time with us. And my name is Leanne Lord. Thank you for joining us tonight. Professor Prothero, thank you.
Thanks for inviting me.
Delightful. Have a good night.